order line to one stock, yes.
Because on an order line, you can't have two stock items. If you have two stock items on the order, there are going to be two separate order lines. Correct?
Okay, yeah, okay.
And the stock item can be on many order lines. All right, because customer A could have ordered red paint in 1 liter cans, and customer B could have ordered red paint in 1 liter cans as well. Okay, so you have two different order lines calling the same stock item. That is why it's a many-to-one relationship here. All right, many order lines can have the same stock item.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, I take it that there are no more questions. I think we finished this. Okay, this is an exercise. Now, if we're going to carry on for another half an hour, what would you like to do? Would you like to go through this, or shall I start another topic? Because this is the last couple of slides that I have.
To be honest, if we're going to do revision on ERDs, I think we can go on with the other topics. I don't know if the others agree. If we're going to do
In fact,
revision.
what I was going to suggest is try this at home. Try it on your own. Okay? And then we can start with it next week. Or you can send me your answers and I can comment on them and let you know whether they're right or wrong. All right, if you have difficulties, but go through and as I said, on Moodle, there is the build-up of that one slide with a whole lot of overprinting on it. There is, and I think it is a PowerPoint file, which builds up as I explained it. Okay, so you can follow that, and as I said, the steps are first of all identify the entities, identify the relationships, and then build a relationship diagram. Oopsie. Okay, we were sharp enough, you got those. No, but try.
Too fast.
I know, I was very fast. But at least you know that there are 4 entities, I think. All right? But try it out so that you can start something else, which follows on to this, because the next set of slides is about find this. Let me just advise my wife that I'm going to do another half an hour because she's preparing supper. Okay, but I'll bring up the new set of slides in a minute.
Spero ma nello centro per Sir, I hope we don't get you in trouble with the missus.
ولا حسنا زايرة عليك.
ما يمشتاق لا yellow card sir.
عشان تلاقينا عاملين. أتسك سهلة كده مش أنت. Anyway, okay, let me get the second set. Yeah. مش هنا تكل خصان ده أتوس ليا. Okay, so scusi.
لك السبشي هيربول لزيت.
أيوه. ما ياو سفن قديمي يعني هيا أو هيا تأتوس. مالا. This carries on from the previous set. In fact, we're going to talk about now normalization. So if you remember, I had mentioned that we have, skużawni, ħniftaħlu l-bib. Yeah, okay. Probably se jkollek il-tiegħu. I had mentioned that we have two ways of data modeling, a top-down approach and a bottom-up technique. So we've just seen the top-down approach and the relationship diagrams. So now we're going to look at normalization. How does normalization work? Right, so first of all, the objectives of normalization. Why do we normalize? Because we need to come up with a complete data model. And having all the entities and all the attributes and make sure that all the data is accessible. We need to eliminate data redundancy. We store data just once. And support easy updating and retrieval. We make it easy for people to access data and to write data to our database. Now normalization, it can.
In this module, till which level are we going to go for the normalization?
To the third normal form.
To the third, okay.
In fact, that's why they are in red here. Right? There are a lot of normalized levels of normalized data, but here in this course we are only going to go down to third normal form. So we start off with a normalized form, which is the data in its raw state. Then we're going to convert it to first normal form, second normal form, and third normal form. Basically, third normal form is normally the level that we need to go down for business databases. Okay? It's only in rare cases that we need to go down to further levels. Now, the concepts of normalization are that all the occurrences of a record type of an entity have to contain the same number of fields, the same number of attributes. So we can't have an occurrence of an entity that has less attributes than other occurrences. It could be that there is no data in an attribute. For example, you could have customers who do not have an email address. But in that case, they still have an attribute called email address, and it will be null, or it will be blank. Another concept is that any non-key field must provide a fact about the key, the whole key and nothing but the key. What are non-key fields? We've already seen that there is a primary key. Now, when we talk about a non-key field, it means it is not a primary key field. Okay? So, those attributes that are not key attributes, that are not primary keys, have to give us a fact about the primary key itself, not about another non-key field. And we violate the third normal form if a non-key field is a fact about another non-key field. And these are the three steps that we need to take to get to third normal form. And I shall be going through a practical example as well, all right, to show you these three steps. So first of all, to get to first normal form, we need to remove repeating groups. Again, this will be clear when we start the example. To second normal form, we remove partial dependencies, and to get to third normal form, we remove transitive dependencies. You're not going to get a practical question on normalization in your exam, all right? But you need to remember these three steps, how we get to third normal form, okay? And to know what they mean. Now let's go through an example. First of all, going to first normal form. So we remove any repeating fields. If I show you the example, it will be clearer. Here we have an invoice. And you need to normalize the data for an invoicing system. So the first thing that we need to identify is the unnormalized data. What is the data on this form here? You tell me. What are the data items here?
So there's invoice number,
Invoice number, yes.
customer number,
Hmm. Others,
like, I guess the item ID,
item ID, yes. There are more, a lot more data items. Yes, Kenneth?
There's the date as well,
The date as well,
and also the document type. If it is an invoice, but you can express it well. You have something is written before us.
Yes, but speak about what you see on here, Kenneth. This is an invoice, right? So we don't have the document type here, but yes, in practice you would have whether it's an invoice or a credit note. Okay, but let's stick to keep it simpler. But there are other data items there.
by data items, it's not necessarily just entities, no, that we're talking about.
No, not just the entities. Here we go to the. This is a bottom up, so we need to go to the attributes.
So there's amount, unit price, or total,
Yes. Total. There's also the
address.
address. Okay, those are all the data items. All right, that we need to have in our system. So if we list them there, right, this is our unnormalized data. Now, to get to first normal form, we need to remove repeating groups. Now, what are the repeating groups here? What are the repeating fields?
There's item description, item ID as well,
Yes.
quantities, amounts, price.
Yes. Okay. So the repeating fields are quantity, item ID, item description, unit price, and amount. Because then they are repeated another 2 or 3 times. So we take them out and create a different table with them, a new table with them, a separate table. Right? So it's quantity, item ID, item description, unit price, and amount. And the other data goes into another table. Now we need to link them together. We need to give them primary keys and we need to link them together. Now for the first table here, right, the primary key is easy, invoice number. It's unique. Right, so that's the primary key there. Here, we don't have uniqueness. Here we also need to have a foreign key that points to invoice number so that this will be linked to that. Because if we look at this data here, we don't know which invoice this particular item has been ordered for this particular quantity. Okay, so here, right, we add invoice number there is our primary key, and we have our foreign keys that links to that. Now, in this table here, invoice number is not going to be unique because here we have 4 lines, 4 or 3, 1, 2, 3, that are going to have the same invoice number. So in order to create uniqueness, we add another attribute, item ID, because invoice number and item ID are unique. Which means if someone is going to order 3 items, those 3 items are going to be different. If 2 of those items are the same, it's going to update the quantity rather than have 2 different lines. So here, invoice number and item ID are our composite primary key. Remember when we spoke about compound primary key? I said in certain instances, we will not have one attribute that gives us uniqueness. They have to be combined. Now, our data is in first normal form because we don't have repeating fields any longer. Right? There are no repeating fields. There are different occurrences in a new table, not a table with repeating fields. Now we have to get to second normal form, remove partial dependencies. Now what is a partial dependency? A partial dependency is where we have a characteristic that is not linked to the whole composite key, but it depends on part of the key. So we need to remove data that depends on part of a key into a separate table. So if we take our example here, that table here does not have a composite key, so it can't have partial dependencies. So it is already in second normal form. First normal form and second normal form for this table are the same. In this table here, right, we have a compound key, so we need to ask whether each of these attributes here depends on the whole key or on part of the key. So for example, quantity depends on both keys. The quantity depends on a particular invoice and a particular item. And they are going to be different. The item description is going to depend on the item ID only. And if we have 10 occurrences in the database with the same item ID, right? Irrespective of the invoice number, the item description is always going to be the same. Similarly, the unit price is always going to be the same. Here we are assuming that prices do not change. Okay, so it's very theoretical. Now this is a funny field. The amount field is a derived field. Anytime that we want, we can derive it, because by knowing the quantity and the unit price, we can calculate the amount. So here, we need to take a decision whether we drop this attribute, because we can derive it and save on space in our database, or we retain it. Here, I have decided that we drop it, we delete it. Now, because we have identified these two data items that are only dependent on item ID, we move them to a new table. Okay? And we use item ID as the primary key. We have item description and unit price because they are linked to item ID. And in the other table, all we have left is invoice number, item ID, and quantity. Now look at this. This is a compound primary key. The individual attributes of the compound primary key are foreign keys. That is a foreign key that links to this primary key, and this is a foreign key that links to this primary key. Do you see how the relationships are formed? Now our data is in second normal form. Now we need to convert that into third normal form. And with third normal form, we remove transitive dependencies. Now what is a transitive dependency? A transitive dependency is when a non-key attribute gives us a fact about another non-key attribute. So if we go back to our data, here we don't have a problem because this is the only non-key field that we have. So this is already in third normal form. Here, right, again, we don't have a problem because unit price does not give us a description of unit description. It gives us a description of item ID. Item description gives us a description of item ID. So these two tables are already, oops, I preempted that. These two tables are already in third normal form. They have no transitive dependencies. If we look at this top table here, invoice date gives us a characteristic about invoice number. So it's okay. customer number gives us a characteristic about invoice number, because we need to know the customer who is going to pay for this invoice. However, customer name gives us a characteristic of customer number. So we have a non-key field here that gives us a characteristic about another non-key field. So it's a transitive dependency. So we need to move it out to a separate table. Similarly, customer address gives us information about customer number, not about invoice number. So it's another non-key field giving us a characteristic of another non-key field. Alright, so here, right, this is what I've just been saying. Customer name and customer address give us a characteristic of customer number, invoice date, and customer number give us a characteristic of invoice number. So these two tables are in third normal form. In this table, we need to take these two out to a separate table. Right, so we move them to a new table, customer and customer address, primary key, customer number. Now note that in our table here, we have customer number here, which is a foreign key to this primary key here. So now our data is in third normal form. So we have gone from this unnormalized data to 4 tables, right, which are now in third normal form. And if we follow the keys, right, we see that customer number is a foreign key linked to the primary key here. Invoice number here is a foreign key linked to primary key there. Item ID is a foreign key linked to the primary key here. So you see how the relationships work. So if we have invoice number 123, we know when it was issued, and we have a customer number. But with customer number, we can't identify the customer. Who is he? Customer number 123. So we look up the customer table. Customer number 123 is Chwanizairim Mangeli, and his address is 123 Main Street, Hamroom. If we look at an invoice line, right, we know that on invoice number 123, we had item ID 23 and we sold 10. But what is item ID 23? So we go to the table with item ID 23, and the item description is red paint, and the unit price is €5 per tin. Okay, so this is how they are linked together. In fact, if we had to draw an entity relationship diagram, it would be our customer, invoice header, invoice line, product. This is very similar to the order that we did when we did the entity relationship diagram. Instead of having an order and an order line, we have an invoice or an invoice header and an invoice line. We have customer with the ERD we had stock there, which is the same thing. Right? And you can see right there then the cardinality and modality. So you see how they link together, how the ERD and normalization link together. And this now is the structure that we can go to a database administrator and tell him to set up our database with the structure. That's a good place to stop, I think.
I don't want to disturb you further, so if you want me to write an email, let me know. But
it would be interesting for the others as well.
All right. So technically speaking, from the first data items that we collected, for example, I could see that the customer number already. And the invoice number, I could have already seen that they are going to end up in separate tables, for example. So couldn't we have, for example, split them up into separate tables in the first step, for example? Or would that mix up things too much?
If you have, because here we are talking about a very small number of data items, so all right, basically 4 tables. So if there are more tables, okay, when it is an easy example like that, yes, sometimes you can get to the final picture through a bit of logic. Okay, but those 3 steps are there because when it becomes more complicated, right, it is not that easy to start to separate them. Okay,
All
that
right,
is
all right.
why there is that approach, because we take it step by step. First, we remove the repeating fields, so we are in first normal form. Then we remove the partial dependencies, so we are in second normal form. Then we remove the transitive dependencies, so we are at third normal form. I mean, an experienced designer, an experienced analyst will go through those steps nearly automatically, right? If there are a manageable number of items. But as I said, in most systems we have a lot more tables than we have here. These are easy examples.
Sorry, sir, I'm not very experienced in this kind of database. So sorry about it.
Here, obviously, we're talking small, right? But the more complex systems, right, then you really need those to follow those 3 steps.
I have,
Yeah,
If
really,
you want-
Kenneth.
I have pasted on our chat a copy of part of the ARD of Sage X3. I had come across it some years ago. Work. Maybe it gives Floyd a better idea when it comes to
That would be interesting because there must be a lot of tables there.
This is just this portion that I got is just the part with regards to contracts. It has nothing to do with the actual accounting portion of it. It is just part.
And how many entities does it have?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Yes, it gets complicated.
At a glance.
Okay, Floyd.
Good example. Now things make more sense.
Sorry, I didn't want to jump the gun or anything, but I had come across it and I remembered it when you were mentioning more than 4 to work when it expanded a bit more.
All right, it makes it more complicated. Okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
So there are no more questions. I'll see you next week. So we'll do another 2.5 hours. And then next week we'll have another session on Friday 26th. Okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye. Good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.